Welcome back to the Nocturnal Astronomer. I'm your host, Atlas Reed, and tonight we're venturing into something truly special. We're going to explore the stars of Middle-earth, not as fantasy alone, but as a carefully constructed cosmology that mirrors our own universe in surprising ways. J.R.R. Tolkien didn't just write stories about hobbits and wizards. He created an entire celestial mythology, complete with its own version of Venus, its own constellations, and stars born from jewels of immeasurable power. We'll trace how the Silmarils became celestial bodies, how the mariners sailed into the sky to become the morning star, and how Tolkien's invented astronomy connects to real myths and real stars that shine above us tonight. Before we begin, if you enjoy these journeys through the cosmos, whether real or imagined, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these explorations. I'm also curious, where in the world are you watching from, and who is your favorite character from Tolkien lore? Let me know in the comments below. Let's dive in. To understand Tolkien's stars, we must first understand that he approached fantasy with the mind of a philologist, a linguist, and a scholar of ancient mythology. When he wrote the Silmarillion, he wasn't merely crafting adventure tales. He was building something he called a mythology for England, a grand cosmological narrative that could stand alongside the Norse Eddas or the Finnish Kalevala. Every element, including the stars themselves, had purpose, history, and meaning. In Tolkien's Legendarium, the universe begins not with a big bang but with music. The music of the Ainur describes how the Supreme Being created the world through song. The Ainur, powerful spiritual beings comparable to gods or angels, each contributed their voice to a great theme. From this cosmic symphony, the physical universe took form. Think of it like this: if our universe emerged from an infinitely dense point expanding outward, Tolkien's universe emerged from harmony and melody becoming matter and light. Different metaphor, same sense of wonder at existence itself. The world that emerged was called Arda, and Middle-earth was part of this larger creation. But here's where it gets interesting for our purposes. In the beginning, Arda existed in a state Tolkien called flat. It wasn't a sphere yet. The stars, sun, and moon had different origins than in our physics. They weren't born from collapsing clouds of hydrogen and helium. They were crafted, made by hand, or rather by the hands of the Valar, the most powerful of the Ainur who descended into the physical world to shape it. The stars hold a position of particular importance in Tolkien's cosmos. They were the first lights, created before the sun and moon. Varda, the queen of the stars, one of the Valar, kindled them in the void. She's described as the most beautiful of the Valar, dwelling in the heights, and she made the ancient stars from silver dew gathered in the wells of heaven. Poetic language, yes, but Tolkien gave these creations specific meaning. The stars weren't just decorative. They were signals, markers of time, and most importantly, they were made for the elves. When the elves first awakened beside the waters under a starlit sky, before sun or moon existed, the stars were their first sight. This moment imprinted itself on elvish consciousness forever. They became known as the people of the stars, and starlight remained sacred to them throughout all the ages that followed. This is why Galadriel's phial, given to Frodo, contains the light of the mariner's star. It's not just any light. It's starlight, the first light, the light that greeted the firstborn children. The ancient elves gave themselves a name in their own language that meant star people, and they carried this identity through all their wanderings. When they looked up at night, they weren't just seeing distant suns burning millions of miles away, as we understand stars today. They were seeing the craftsmanship of the divine, deliberate beacons placed specifically for them. Each star was a reminder that they were seen, known, and valued by powers greater than themselves. This is fundamentally different from how we experience stars today. When we look up at the night sky, we see the result of physics, of gravity pulling hydrogen together until fusion ignites, creating furnaces that burn for billions of years. We see light that left those stars decades, centuries, or millennia ago, traveling across the incomprehensible void to reach our eyes. The stars are beautiful, awe-inspiring, but impersonal. They exist regardless of whether anyone watches them. They burn by the laws of thermodynamics and nuclear physics, not by intention or care. Tolkien's stars, by contrast, were personal. They were a gift, a welcome, a promise. Varda made them knowing that the elves would awaken and need light to see by. She arranged them in patterns that would be meaningful, that would tell stories, that would mark the seasons and the passage of time. When an elf looked up, they saw evidence of divine love written across the cosmos. This wasn't a cold, mechanical universe. It was a created one, crafted with purpose. Yet Tolkien, brilliant as he was, didn't completely divorce his mythology from actual astronomy. He understood that even in a mythological framework, stars needed to behave in ways that felt real, that had weight and consequence. The stars moved across the sky in predictable patterns. They rose and set. They marked the turning of the year. Navigators could use them to find their way. In this sense, the stars of Middle-earth functioned exactly as real stars do, even if their origin story was entirely different. This blending of the mythological and the practical is one of Tolkien's greatest strengths as a world builder. He never let his fantasy become so divorced from reality that it lost believability. The stars might have been kindled by a goddess, but once kindled, they followed rules. They made sense. They could be studied, mapped, and relied upon. An elf sailing the seas could navigate by them just as human sailors navigated by the stars in our own history. The stars that Varda created weren't scattered randomly. Tolkien, ever the meticulous world builder, gave them structure and purpose. She fashioned them into constellations that the elves would recognize and name, patterns that would guide them through the darkness of a world not yet graced by the greater lights. Some of these constellations we know by name from Tolkien's writings, and they reveal his deep knowledge of real-world astronomy and mythology. Consider the sickle of the Valar, which we might recognize as Tolkien's version of the Big Dipper or Ursa Major. In our sky, the Big Dipper has guided travelers and sailors for thousands of years, always pointing toward the North Star. In Middle-earth, the sickle had a different but equally important purpose. Varda set it in the northern sky as a challenge and a threat to the Fallen One, the Valar who would become the first Dark Lord. The sickle shape symbolized the downfall awaiting him, a cosmic warning written in stars. Think of it as a celestial billboard, impossible to miss, reminding the forces of darkness that their defeat was already written in the heavens. Then there's the butterfly, identified with what we call Cassiopeia. In our mythology, Cassiopeia was a vain queen, but in Tolkien's creation, the butterfly simply describes its shape, a delicate pattern of stars tracing wings across the darkness. These kinds of details matter. Tolkien didn't just borrow wholesale from existing myths. He transformed them, gave them new names in his invented languages, and wove them into his own narrative tapestry. The Dome of Heaven corresponds to Orion, one of the most recognizable constellations in our night sky. Orion the Hunter has featured in myths from ancient Greece to indigenous Australia. In Middle-earth, this constellation held similar prominence, visible across the seasons, a reliable marker in the turning year. What matters is that Tolkien recognized the same pattern that countless human cultures had seen and found significant, and he gave it a place in his cosmos with its own meaning and importance. But beyond these familiar patterns, Tolkien created something entirely unique, the story of stars that were not kindled by Varda from cosmic materials but were instead fashioned by mortal hands. Well, not entirely mortal, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. This is where the Silmarils enter our story, and with them, we move from cosmology to cosmic drama. The Silmarils were 3 jewels created by the greatest of the elven craftsmen, the most talented of the deep elves who pursued knowledge and craft with passionate intensity. He captured within these gems the light of the 2 trees, which lit the blessed realm before the sun and moon existed. Imagine trying to capture moonlight in a jar, except the moonlight is actually the combined radiance of 2 enormous mystical trees, one silver, one gold, and the jar is an imperishable jewel harder than diamond. The Silmarils held this light imperishably, shining with their own radiance, beautiful beyond description. These jewels became the source of nearly all the tragedy in the Silmarillion. The fallen Valar, already corrupted into darkness, coveted them. He stole them, murdered the craftsman's father in the theft, and fled back to Middle-earth. The craftsman swore a terrible oath, binding himself and his sons to pursue the Silmarils to the ends of the earth, against any power, mortal or divine, that would keep them from their prize. This oath set in motion centuries of war, betrayal, and sorrow. It also set in motion the journey that would place one of these jewels in the sky as a star. Here we see Tolkien's genius at connecting human desires, cosmic consequences, and ultimate redemption. The Silmarils weren't just plot devices to drive the action. They represented something deeper, the beauty of creation, the danger of possessiveness, and the possibility that even things born from pride and tragedy can be transformed into sources of hope. One Silmaril would end up in the depths of the earth, one in the deepest waters, and one in the heavens. 3 jewels, 3 realms, 3 fates. The craftsman himself met a terrible end, consumed by his own oath and the fires of his passion. But the Silmarils endured. They were indestructible, imperishable, and they carried within them a light that predated the sun itself. This light was holy, in a sense. It came from the 2 trees, which were themselves sacred creations. The Silmarils would burn the hands of anyone evil who tried to hold them. Even their rightful maker couldn't touch them after the evil deeds his oath drove him to commit. This concept of holy light that judges the bearer is fascinating from a mythological standpoint. Many traditions have similar ideas: the holy grail that only the pure can approach, sacred fires that don't burn the righteous, swords that only the worthy can draw. Tolkien tapped into this deep mythic resonance. The Silmarils became tests of character as much as treasures. They revealed truth. They couldn't be deceived or fooled. Hold one, and your true nature showed itself through whether it burned you or not. In our universe, light is light. Photons don't carry moral weight. The light from a distant star doesn't care about the character of the person seeing it. It simply is electromagnetic radiation traveling at the speed of light, neither good nor evil. But in mythology, light often represents truth, goodness, divinity. Darkness represents ignorance, evil, corruption. Tolkien took this symbolic association and made it literal in his world. The light of the Silmarils was objectively holy. It had moral character. It couldn't coexist with corruption. Now we come to perhaps the most important star in all of Tolkien's mythology, the morning star. In our sky, the morning star is Venus, the brightest natural thing in the night sky besides the moon. Venus isn't actually a star, of course. It's a planet, our closest planetary neighbor, shrouded in thick clouds with surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead. But to ancient observers, Venus appeared as a brilliant beacon, heralding dawn or appearing at dusk, and nearly every culture gave it special significance. The mariner, too, would become a herald, but his story begins on Earth, or rather, in Middle-earth. He was born in a hidden elven city, son of a mortal man and an elven princess. This made him half-elven, partaking of both mortal and immortal nature, a duality that would shape his destiny. Think of him as bridging two worlds, not just in ancestry but in purpose, destined to become a messenger between Earth and heaven. The hidden city fell to the forces of the Dark Lord in a terrible siege, one of the most dramatic episodes in the Silmarillion. The mariner was a young child, carried to safety in the escape. He grew up among the survivors at the mouths of Surion, where the great river met the sea, and there he developed a love for the ocean and for ships. He built a vessel and became a mariner, sailing the known seas and eventually venturing into the unknown. The mariner married a princess who herself had a remarkable heritage. She possessed one of the three Silmarils, the great jewel having come to her through a chain of tragic inheritances. When the sons of the craftsmen, still bound by their father's terrible oath, attacked the refugees to claim the Silmaril, she cast herself into the sea to protect it. The Valar took pity on her, transforming her into a great white bird, and she flew across the ocean to find her husband with the Silmaril still in her possession. This is where the story takes its cosmic turn. The mariner, bearing the Silmaril on his brow, decided to attempt something no mortal or elf had successfully done in ages: sail to the Blessed Realm in the west to beg the Valar for aid against the Dark Lord. Middle-earth was drowning in darkness. The great elven kingdoms had fallen. The enemy's power seemed unstoppable. Someone needed to bridge the gap between the mortal lands and the divine powers who had mostly withdrawn from active involvement in Middle-earth's struggles. The journey was forbidden. After the rebellion of the craftsman and his people, who had defied the Valar and brought war and kinslaying to Middle-earth in pursuit of the Silmarils, the way to the Blessed Realm had been closed. The seas themselves were enchanted to confuse and turn back any who tried to find the way. Ships that ventured too far west simply found themselves sailing in circles, or were driven back by storms, or became lost in mists that never lifted. But the mariner had something unique, a Silmaril. The jewel shone on his brow as he sailed, and its light was older and holier than the enchantments that guarded the way. Think of it like a passkey, a token that identified him as bearing something the Valar themselves would want to see again. The light cut through the confusion, through the mists, through the magical barriers. It proclaimed that this was no ordinary traveler, no rebel seeking forbidden knowledge, but someone bearing one of the most precious things ever created. After a perilous voyage, the mariner reached the shores of the Blessed Realm. He came before the Valar and spoke on behalf of both elves and men, pleading for mercy, for intervention, for help against an enemy that the peoples of Middle-earth could no longer resist alone. This took extraordinary courage. He was, after all, part mortal. He was related to those who had defied the Valar, who had brought ruin through their pride and oaths. He had no guarantee he would be heard, or that he would even be allowed to return. The Valar debated. Some questioned whether they should intervene again, whether the peoples of Middle-earth needed to face the consequences of their own choices. But the mariner's plea, and the very fact that he had succeeded in reaching them, moved them. They decided to act. They would send a great host to Middle-earth, would wage war against the Dark Lord, would break his power once and for all. This decision led to the War of Wrath, the greatest battle in Middle-earth's history, which reshaped the very geography of the world. But the mariner's fate was special. The Valar decreed that he, bearing a Silmaril, would not simply return to Middle-earth as a messenger. Instead, they would send him into the sky. His ship would be lifted up, sailing the heavens, and the Silmaril on his brow would shine as a star, the brightest star, a sign of hope to all who dwelt below. He would become the morning star, rising before the sun, a herald of the light, a reminder that even in the darkest times, help had come from beyond the circles of the world. The transformation of the mariner into the morning star represents one of Tolkien's most profound mythological achievements. He took a classical motif, the morning star as a symbol of hope, and wove it into his own narrative in a way that feels both fresh and ancient. Let's explore what this means, both within Middle-earth and in connection to our own sky. In our world, Venus as the morning star has been significant to cultures across the globe for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks called it Phosphorus or Iosphorus, meaning light bringer or dawn bringer. The Romans called it Lucifer, which has the same meaning, light bringer. This name was later associated with the fallen angel in Christian tradition, but originally it simply described the planet's role as the herald of dawn. The Maya tracked Venus with extraordinary precision, incorporating it into their calendar systems. Indigenous peoples of the Americas told stories about it. It was universal, this sense that the brightest wandering light in the sky meant something important. Venus appears as the morning star for several months at a time, rising in the east before dawn, sometimes visible even after the sun comes up. Then it transitions, disappearing from the morning sky and reappearing in the evening, setting in the west after sunset. The ancient world didn't always realize these were the same thing. They sometimes gave different names to the morning and evening appearances. But whether they knew it was one object or thought it was two, the symbolism remained, a bright light appearing at the transitions between day and night, between darkness and dawn. Tolkien captured this perfectly with the mariner's star. The Silmaril shining in the sky became a sign visible to all the peoples of Middle-earth. When they looked up in the hours before dawn, they saw the mariner sailing in the heavens, and they took hope. The light reminded them that someone had gone to the Valar on their behalf, that the divine powers had not forgotten them, that help existed beyond the edges of their world. In the darkest part of the First Age, when the enemy seemed invincible, the mariner's star was a promise written in light across the sky. But Tolkien went deeper than simple symbolism. He connected the star to his broader themes of sacrifice and transformation. The mariner didn't become a star through his own power. He was elevated, lifted up by the Valar, given a task and a purpose. He would sail the heavens forever, bearing the Silmaril, unable to return to Middle-earth, unable to grow old or die in the normal sense. He was made into something new, something between mortal and immortal, between earthly and divine. This transformation came at a cost. He left behind the world he knew. His wife joined him, yes, transformed into a bird who flew up to his ship, but they left behind children, left behind the possibility of a normal life. They became eternal guardians, lights in the darkness, but they paid for that role with their freedom. This is classic mythological thinking. The hero who ascends to the heavens often does so through sacrifice, through giving up earthly joys for a higher purpose. In Greek mythology, we see similar patterns. Heracles becomes a god after his death, ascending to Olympus. Castor and Pollux become the constellation Gemini. Orion becomes his constellation after death. Many heroes end up in the sky, transformed into stars or constellations, remembered forever but removed from the mortal world they once knew. Tolkien tapped into this ancient pattern, this sense that the greatest heroes might leave the earth entirely, becoming part of the cosmos itself. The mariner's star also functions as a narrative device brilliantly. It connects the first age to all the ages that follow. Long after the War of Wrath, long after the Dark Lord is defeated and the world is reshaped, the star still shines. Characters in The Lord of the Rings look up and see it. They remember the old stories. They take courage from the same light that gave hope to their ancestors thousands of years earlier. The star is continuity, a thread connecting past to present. When Galadriel fills a phial with water that holds the light of the mariner's star and gives it to Frodo, she's giving him more than a magical lantern. She's giving him a piece of the First Age, a connection to the greatest deeds of the past, a reminder that darkness has been fought and overcome before. The light that helps Frodo in the tunnels under the mountains is the same light that Varda kindled for the two trees that the craftsman captured in the Silmarils that the mariner carried to the Blessed Realm. It's layered with meaning, with history, with the accumulated weight of ages. This is what separates Tolkien's mythology from simpler fantasy. Everything connects. The stars aren't just decoration. They're history. They're characters who were transformed. They're theological statements about the nature of light and darkness. They're practical tools for navigation. They're sources of hope. They're reminders of sacrifice. Every time a character looks up at the night sky in Middle-earth, they're engaging with thousands of years of story. To understand how Tolkien created his stellar mythology, we need to look at the sources he drew from. Tolkien was a scholar of medieval literature, fluent in Old English, Old Norse, Gothic, and other ancient languages. He spent his professional life studying myths, epics, and legends. When he built Middle-earth, he wasn't creating from nothing. He was synthesizing, transforming, and reimagining elements from dozens of real-world traditions. The most obvious influence on his cosmology is Norse mythology. The creation story in Norse myth involves gods shaping the world from the body of a primordial giant. The cosmos has a structure, different realms connected by a world tree, gods who dwell above, humans in the middle, and darker powers below. Tolkien borrowed this layered cosmos, this sense of a world created by divine powers who remain active in its affairs, though often at a remove from daily events. The Finnish Kalevala influenced Tolkien even more directly. He was fascinated by Finnish as a language and by the Kalevala as a national epic. The Kalevala tells the story of heroes, craftsmen, and magicians in a mythological Finland. One character, Ilmarinen, is a smith who forges the Sampo, a mysterious mill or treasure that brings prosperity. Another character, Vainamoinen, is a wise singer whose words have magical power. Tolkien took elements from both, the craftsman who creates something precious that becomes a source of conflict, and the power of song and words to shape reality. In fact, the music of the Ainur that creates the world in Tolkien's mythology has clear parallels to the Kalevala's emphasis on song as a magical force. Vainamoinen defeats enemies and accomplishes great deeds through singing. The world itself, in some versions, comes into being through song. Tolkien elevated this to the cosmic level, not just magic through song, but creation itself through song, the universe as a symphony performed by spiritual beings under the direction of a supreme conductor. The biblical creation story also influenced Tolkien, though he transformed it considerably. The idea of a supreme being speaking the world into existence, of creation happening through will and word, echoes Genesis. But Tolkien, a devout Catholic, didn't simply retell the biblical story. He created something that felt mythological, that had the flavor of pagan myth while still expressing Christian theological ideas about creation, fall, and redemption. The mariner's story has parallels to several mythological figures. The most obvious is the Greek myth of the Argonauts, particularly Jason's quest across unknown seas. But there's also Odysseus, whose long voyage home became one of the defining stories of Western literature. Tolkien combined these elements of the hero mariner with the Christian idea of the intercessor, someone who pleads on behalf of humanity before divine powers, like Christ or the saints in Catholic theology. The morning star itself has layers of meaning in various traditions. We've mentioned the Greek and Roman associations. In Christian symbolism, Christ is sometimes called the morning star, the light that heralds salvation. The Book of Revelation refers to Christ as the bright morning star. Tolkien, writing as a Christian, would have been aware of these associations. By making his mariner into the morning star, he was tapping into deep symbolic currents, suggesting themes of salvation, hope, and divine intervention. But Tolkien wasn't simply copying. He transformed everything he touched. The mariner isn't Christ, he's a half-elven sailor carrying a stolen jewel on a desperate mission. The creation story isn't Genesis, it's a musical composition by angelic beings. The stars aren't just lights in the firmament, they're crafted decorations made for specific people at a specific time. Tolkien took the raw materials of mythology and forged something new, something distinctly his own while still resonating with the old stories. This is the mark of great myth-making. The best myths don't spring from nowhere. They're in conversation with earlier myths, borrowing, transforming, commenting, reimagining. Tolkien understood this better than almost any fantasy writer. He knew that to make something that felt truly mythological, it had to have weight, history, multiple layers of meaning. It had to feel like it was part of a tradition, even if that tradition was itself fictional. His academic background gave him the tools to do this. He knew how myths evolved, how stories changed as they passed from culture to culture, how different traditions influenced each other. He applied this knowledge to his own creation, building not just a story but something that felt like it had existed for centuries, like it had been told and retold, elaborated and refined by generations of storytellers. While Tolkien's cosmology is fundamentally mythological, it's interesting to examine how it relates to real astronomy and where Tolkien showed his understanding of the actual night sky. Despite creating a fantasy universe with different origins for celestial bodies, Tolkien made sure his stars behaved in ways that any observer would recognize. First, the basic function of stars in Middle-earth matches their function in our world. They're fixed lights in the sky that move in predictable patterns as the Earth rotates. Well, Tolkien's world is flat initially, so it's not exactly rotating, but the effect is the same. The stars rise in the east and set in the west, wheeling around a celestial pole. This is what any observer on Earth sees, and it's what observers in Middle-earth see too. Tolkien understood that even in a mythological framework, astronomical observations need to be consistent. The constellations Tolkien describes, like the sickle of the Valar, have clear counterparts in our sky. The Big Dipper is one of the most recognizable star patterns in the Northern Hemisphere. It's part of Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and its pointer stars lead to Polaris, the North Star. Sailors, travelers, and anyone needing to find north at night have used it for thousands of years. By placing a version of the Big Dipper in Middle-earth's sky, Tolkien was ensuring his world had the same navigational tools, the same sense of cosmic orientation that humans have always relied on. Orion, which corresponds to one of Tolkien's named constellations, is even more universal. It's visible from both hemispheres and has been recognized by cultures worldwide. The three stars of Orion's belt are distinctive, and the constellation as a whole is one of the brightest in the sky. In Greek mythology, Orion was a hunter placed in the sky after his death. In Egyptian tradition, the three belt stars were associated with Osiris. In Chinese astronomy, it represented a warrior. Tolkien was working in this same tradition, taking a pattern that humans naturally recognize and giving it meaning within his mythological framework. The morning star itself, Venus, is the third brightest natural thing in our sky after the sun and moon. At its brightest, Venus can cast shadows. It's bright enough to be visible during the day if you know where to look. Its brilliance made it special to every culture that watched the sky. Tolkien's decision to make the mariner's star the morning star wasn't arbitrary. He wanted the most prominent stellar symbol, the most recognizable beacon, to represent hope and divine intervention in his mythology. Interestingly, Venus isn't a star at all. It's a planet, roughly Earth's size, the second planet from the Sun. Its brightness comes from its proximity to Earth and the highly reflective clouds that cover it completely. Those clouds are sulfuric acid, and beneath them the surface temperature reaches over 800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. The atmospheric pressure at the surface is 90 times Earth's, equivalent to being 3,000 feet underwater. Venus is a hellish place, despite its beauty from Earth. Tolkien wouldn't have known these details, at least not in the specificity we know them today. The Venera probes that actually landed on Venus and sent back data didn't launch until the 1960s and 70s, after Tolkien had written most of his mythology. But he would have known Venus was a planet, not a star, and that it appeared bright due to reflected sunlight. He chose to ignore these astronomical facts in favor of mythological resonance. In Middle-earth, the morning star is genuinely a star, or rather a silmaril, a jewel containing light older than the sun itself. This is an important point about how Tolkien approached world building. He wasn't writing science fiction, where the goal is to extrapolate from real science. He was writing mythology, where the goal is to create meaning, symbolism, and emotional truth. In mythology, the morning star can be a sailor bearing a holy jewel through the heavens. It doesn't matter that this violates physics. What matters is what it means, how it makes us feel, how it connects to themes of hope, sacrifice, and divine purpose. Yet Tolkien was too knowledgeable to make his astronomy completely arbitrary. He understood precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes the position of the celestial pole to shift over thousands of years. He understood that different cultures saw different stars from different latitudes. He knew that the appearance of certain stars marked the seasons, that the rising of particular constellations signaled planting time or harvest time in agricultural societies. This knowledge informed his world building even when he was creating something fantastical. The result is a mythology that feels grounded even as it soars into the fantastic. An astronomer reading Tolkien won't find accurate astrophysics, but they'll find a deep appreciation for what stars mean to human cultures, how they've functioned as calendars, compasses, and storytelling devices throughout history. Tolkien captured the human experience of looking up at the night sky and seeing meaning, seeing patterns, seeing stories written in light. Beyond their practical and mythological functions, the stars in Tolkien's legendarium carry deep theological significance. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and while he insisted his work was an allegory, it's permeated with Christian themes and ideas. The stars are part of this, serving as symbols of divine presence, hope, and the relationship between creator and creation. The first and most obvious theological dimension is the act of creation itself. In Christian theology, creation demonstrates God's power, love, and intention. The universe isn't an accident. It exists because God willed it into being. Tolkien mirrors this in his cosmology. The Supreme Being creates through music, which then becomes reality. The Valar, analogous to angels, enter creation and shape it further. The stars are part of this deliberate creative act, made specifically for the elves, evidence of divine care and attention. This ties into the medieval concept of the stars as the handiwork of God, visible evidence of divine creativity. Medieval Christians looked at the night sky and saw order, beauty, and design. They believed the stars were placed by God for specific purposes, to mark time, to give light, to display divine glory. Varda fulfills exactly this role. She doesn't create randomly. She crafts constellations, arranges patterns, makes the stars beautiful and functional. They're art as much as astronomy. The light of the stars carries special significance in Tolkien's theology. Light is good, darkness is the absence or corruption of light. The stars were the first lights, created before the sun and moon. They represent primordial goodness, creation unspoiled. When the Dark Lord destroys the two trees and steals the Silmarils, he's attacking light itself, trying to hoard and corrupt the fundamental goodness of creation. The fact that one Silmaril escapes and becomes a star represents the indestructibility of good, the way that light persists even in the darkest times. The mariner's elevation to the heavens can be read as a kind of assumption, similar to how Mary in Catholic tradition was assumed body and soul into heaven. The mariner doesn't die and go to an afterlife. He's taken up, transformed, made into something that exists between earth and heaven, partaking of both mortal and divine nature. His role as intercessor, the one who pleads before the Valar on behalf of both elves and men, parallels Christ's role as mediator between God and humanity, or the saints' role as intercessors in Catholic theology. The star itself becomes a symbol of hope that's explicitly theological. Hope in Christian theology isn't just optimism or wishful thinking. It's a theological virtue, a gift from God, a confidence in divine providence even when circumstances seem hopeless. The mariner's star embodies this. It shines brightest in the hours before dawn, in the deepest darkness, promising that morning will come. This is hope as Tolkien understood it, not a denial of darkness, but a light within darkness, a promise that darkness isn't final. Tolkien explores this theme most explicitly in The Lord of the Rings when characters invoke the mariner's star in their darkest moments. When Frodo is paralyzed by the spider in the tunnels under the mountains, Sam uses Galadriel's phial, which contains the star's light. The light drives back the darkness, literally and symbolically. It reminds Sam that others have faced evil before and prevailed. It gives him courage to continue when everything seems lost. This is prayer made physical, hope made tangible. The choice to place the Silmaril in the heavens rather than on Earth is theologically significant too. The Silmarils on Earth caused nothing but tragedy. Everyone who pursued them, even with legitimate claims, came to grief. The jewels were too beautiful, too precious, and they revealed the corruption in those who sought them. By placing one beyond reach, beyond possession, Tolkien suggests that some beautiful things aren't meant to be owned. They're meant to be appreciated, to give light to all, not hoarded by any one person or group. This reflects Christian ideas about creation and stewardship. The world isn't ours to possess, but to care for. Beauty isn't meant to be locked away, but shared. The mariner's star gives its light freely to everyone, elf, man, or anyone else who looks up. It can't be stolen, bought, or claimed. It just is, shining, a gift that nobody owns but everyone receives. This is creation as it should be, generous, abundant, blessing all without discrimination. The theological dimension adds depth to Tolkien's astronomy. The stars aren't just lights or plot devices. They're arguments about the nature of creation, the reality of good and evil, the possibility of hope, and the proper relationship between creator and creation. Tolkien never preaches, never breaks the mythological frame to deliver theological lectures. But the theology is there, woven into the fabric of the story, evident to those who look for it. As we come to the end of our journey through Tolkien's celestial mythology, it's worth reflecting on why these invented stars matter, why they've captured imaginations for decades, and what they tell us about the human relationship with the night sky. Tolkien created more than fantasy astronomy. He created something that resonates with how humans have always experienced stars, as sources of wonder, meaning, and connection to something greater than ourselves. The genius of Tolkien's stars is that they work on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface level, they're world-building details that make Middle-earth feel rich and real. Characters navigate by them, mark time by their movements, and recognize constellations. This grounds the fantasy, makes it feel like a place that actually exists. But beneath that surface, the stars carry layers of meaning: mythological, theological, emotional, symbolic. They're not just decoration. They're integral to what makes Middle-earth feel like it has depth and history. This multi-layered approach mirrors how real stars function in human culture. When ancient sailors navigated by the stars, they weren't just using them as tools. They were engaging with stories, with myths, with cultural meaning. The same stars that guided ships also represented gods, heroes, and animals in the mythologies of their cultures. Practical astronomy and mythological astronomy were inseparable. Tolkien understood this. His stars fulfilled practical functions while simultaneously carrying mythological weight, just as real stars always have for humanity. The fact that Tolkien's mythology remains influential, that people still read the Silmarillion despite its challenging style, that the Mariner's Star appears in adaptations and discussions, speaks to something profound. We're drawn to stories that give meaning to the natural world. We want the things we see in the sky to matter, to be part of larger narratives, to connect us to history and purpose. Tolkien provided that. He gave us stars with stories, celestial lights that mean something beyond their physical existence. Compare this to how we typically experience stars in our modern, scientific understanding. We know they're fusion reactors, massive spheres of plasma converting hydrogen to helium, releasing tremendous energy. We know they're born from collapsing gas clouds, burn for millions or billions of years, and die as white dwarfs, neutron stars, or black holes. We know their light has traveled across vast distances, showing us the past, not the present. We know they're impersonal, operating by physics, indifferent to whether anyone watches them. This knowledge is wonderful, awe-inspiring in its own right. Understanding the life cycle of stars, the nucleosynthesis that creates the elements, the immense scales of time and distance involved, gives us a profound appreciation for the cosmos. But it's a different kind of meaning than mythological meaning. It's not personal. The stars don't know we exist. They weren't made for us. They don't carry messages or promises. They just are, governed by gravity and thermodynamics. Tolkien's stars offer something our scientific understanding can't: intention, purpose, care. They were made for the elves. They carry the light of an earlier creation. They include a hero transformed, sailing the heavens, watching over those below. They promise hope. They remember tragedy. They connect past to present. They're part of a story that includes us, not distant furnaces indifferent to our existence. This is what mythology has always done, turned the impersonal universe into something meaningful, something that speaks to human concerns. We need both kinds of understanding. We need the scientific knowledge that tells us what stars actually are, that lets us predict eclipses, navigate spacecraft, and understand our place in a vast, ancient cosmos. But we also need the mythological understanding that gives us meaning, connection, and emotional resonance with the night sky. We need to know that stars are fusion reactors, and we need to feel that they're beautiful, mysterious, worthy of story and song. Tolkien gave us a model for how these two understandings can coexist. He knew the astronomy of his time. He understood that his mythological cosmology wasn't literally true. But he also understood that mythological truth is a different kind of truth, one that addresses questions science can't answer. In Middle-earth, when characters look up and see the mariner's star, they're not just seeing a bright point of light. They're seeing history. They're seeing sacrifice. They're seeing hope. They're connecting to their ancestors who saw the same light and took courage from it. They're participating in a story larger than themselves. This is what humans have always done when we look at the stars, and it's what we still do, even knowing the scientific facts. We see patterns. We tell stories. We make meaning. And on that note, we come to the end of our exploration of the stars of Middle-earth. We've journeyed from the first kindling of starlight for the awakening elves, through the tragedy of the Silmarils, to the elevation of the mariner as the morning star. We've seen how Tolkien drew on real mythology, real astronomy, and real theology to create something that feels both ancient and new, both fantastical and deeply true. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the celestial mythology of Middle-earth. I hope you'll look up at the night sky tonight with fresh eyes, seeing not just distant suns but stories, meanings, and the accumulated wonder of millennia. Until next time, this is Atlas Reed with the Nocturnal Astronomer.